Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts Alex and Sean. On this episode, we have the Bears quarterback market not looking so hot, Blackhawks on fire, and the Bulls beat the Golden State Warriors. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable pricing. So head on over to icehogs.com. Get yourself a hat, jersey, tickets, and more. Only 90 minutes from the city limits and fun for the whole family. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Hey, Alex, my friend, how have you been?
I've been pretty well. How are you doing?
The Blackhawks are on fire, so that is a good thing, and that makes me in a good mood.
Absolutely. It's like watching the Blackhawks we know and love. This is where that team went. They're back now. It feels like things are right again.
Yeah, and it sucks is because they get in a sweet rhythm, and then they have a week-long break. They get another sweet rhythm, and then they have almost a week break.
Yeah, I mean, I think this time around, it's a little good to have that break, considering we've had a few nagging injuries with Hjalmarsson and Anisimov, and I know Schmaltz was ill, so I guess it's good to take this little break time for everyone to get better, get back again, and keep going at it.
And give Johnny Oduya, our newest Chicago Blackhawks, some time to work with the team.
Absolutely, and I was thrilled when they made that deal because they got a veteran defenseman who's very familiar with the franchise, the coaching, the system, the players, and we really didn't give up anything for it. So it was a really nice move by Stan Bowman.
Yeah, especially considering that the Blackhawks only have to pay half his salary. That's a really nice thing to be able to fit into the budget restraints. And more importantly is, it's always important to fit in well with the, know the system and know the team, is Coach Quenneville trusts him.
Yes.
That is important because there is little room to get out of a doghouse as a defenseman if Joe Quenneville has put you in the doghouse.
No kidding. I mean, we've seen it happen to multiple people.
Yeah, and they usually get shipped out of town. Johnny Oduya has he's done some really nice, he's done some boneheaded things with the Blackhawks, but he's done some really nice things with the Blackhawks, and he's a face that you could trust. He's getting a little up there in years. Was he 35 now?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
But it's nice to have him back, especially for a playoff run.
Exactly, and the main thing we gave up in that deal, besides the conditional pick, is McNeil, and I think it was pretty obvious that McNeil really isn't an NHL caliber player. I don't know what you think about that, but it felt like he was never really going to make it in the NHL. Not at least for sure, not with the Blackhawks.
Yeah, I think he's a talented guy. It just he's not what the Blackhawks are looking for, and he was just going to waste away in the AHL.
Right.
And I think it was best for him to move him along to a team that maybe he gets to play for. But the Blackhawks gave up next to nothing to bring Johnny Oduya back.
Yeah, exactly. And, there was a lot of talk about what Stan Bowman was going to do at the deadline because people were talking about more forwards. And it's like, well, we saw last year where he made a ton of trades for forwards and maybe he made one trade too many. I mean, there were talks about Patrick Sharp. There were talks about a few other guys. I think at the Avalanche, they were looking at people like Landeskog, and they were maybe considering Thomas Vanek from the Red Wings before he went to the Panthers. So, I mean, there were a lot of rumors circling around, but to me it was pretty obvious that there was going to be kind of one decent move, and this was a great move. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was a good team move. I didn't see a big blockbuster happening with the Hawks, considering the salary cap and considering what tradable assets we do have in what would make a package. You know, you don't really have as much of that.
Yeah, and they made it clear that they wanted to maintain their high draft picks because the NHL draft is going to be in Chicago this year and that they're hosting it, so they wanted to have high draft picks. So they weren't going to trade those away, and they did have budget constraints. And if you listen to the real people that know a lot about hockey, some of the great Chicago Blackhawk podcasts and whatnot, they all pretty much were dead on that they weren't going to make a big trade for a forward. They were going to, if anything, it was going to be a defenseman, and lo and behold, here comes Johnny Oduya.
Yeah, and I think that was the right move for sure because, the defense has had its ups and downs this year. You have some good guys, but to give it some more depth, especially experience depth that you've won 2 cups with, is a really, really good thing to have. And I think Bowman made the perfect moves. He got Thomas Yurko, someone who's got potential. He was kind of in the doghouse in Detroit, so to speak. I think he's only 24, but he wasn't getting much playing time. But he definitely has talent to play in the NHL, so a change of scenery could do him good. And then you get Johnny Oduya back. I think you made your big move with Johnny Oduya, and you made kind of a smaller move with Thomas Yurko. So, I think those are 2 really solid moves, and we didn't need to do anything more, really. I don't think so.
Yeah, and then the nice part about it is you bring in a familiar face, so you know how that, how well he's going to fit in there. It's not like he's not that far removed from the core of this team. And, based on the reaction, Nick Hjalmarsson was really excited about it. So
Yes.
And that it makes you wonder what's going to be the preferred third defenseman pairing going forward from here.
Yeah, it's funny. Right now, you have Keith and Seabrook who have been playing together for a bit, and you've seen what they've done to some of the top scoring stars in the NHL the past few games. You've seen them shut down the guys of Sidney Crosby, Malkin, Tavares when they played the Islanders. So the defense has really done a good job as of late of shutting the high-powered offenses down in some of these wins. I know they gave up 3 goals to the Predators, but considering what they did against the Penguins, and I know the Islanders aren't great, but Tavares is a really good scorer, and they got some good scorers on that unit. So, you got to give them a lot of credit. They've done a good job, along with the goaltending.
Yeah, and the Preds game, I mean, you watch it, they looked exhausted. They looked tired, but not in a bad way. I don't know how to describe it. Is if you watch them, is you could just see that they were tired, but they were toughing it out and put in enough effort to win that game against the Predators.
Yeah, and that was a really nice win too because they had that 3-1 lead. Jordan Tutu finally scores a goal, and then the Predators tie it. Yeah, and a fight. He was an assist away from a Gordie Howe hat trick.
That he was.
If that would have been something if he got one of those. But it was just like, when the Predators tied, I'm like, man, really? Just, ugh. But Brian Campbell saves the day, and then, 5 seconds later, they get an easy empty netter for a 5-3 win. And that was after a really boring and frustrating game that turned out to be an exciting victory against the Islanders.
Yeah, and that was another game. They looked tired. I mean, they've been playing, it seems like almost every other day for the last week. And that's
Since
part
that
of the
bye
trouble
week,
with, that's the part of the trouble is with that bye week is you get a week off, but then you're, compressing several games into a smaller amount of time. You just don't get that rest off in, between games besides that 1 week. This week alone, they had They had the Penguins game, the Islanders game, the Predators game, which were all really tough games and
Yep.
nice wins, but tough games.
Absolutely. And I think, I didn't see much of the game because I was out, but I saw the highlights. I looked at the stats, and, to really play so well and beat up 4-1 the defending champion Penguins, I mean, that was a really impressive victory. And you see Patrick Kane get, his second hat trick in a week? I mean, Patrick Kane right now, this is the Patrick Kane we know. Racking up the points. It's Jonathan Toews, too.
Yeah, Jonathan Toews, I think it was the Shoutcast, they tweeted out a statistic that statistically Jonathan Toews was the best player in the NHL in February.
Yeah, he was. I mean, there was a number of metrics, showing that he was, and a lot of people were saying, oh man, should we trade Toews? Is he washed up? Just complete, utter nonsense. And you saw earlier in the year that it wasn't like Toews wasn't getting chances. There were times when the puck just was not going his way. The bounces were just not going his way. And he found this chemistry with Nick Schmaltz that's pretty unbelievable. If you've seen what those two have done the past 2 weeks, it's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, it's really nice. It's nice to figure out that top line. It's been anytime it's been successful, it's either you've had to put Toews and Kane together, or Toews just really would work hard to make that effort go, make that line go. And now you're starting to see that line become organically, a really good line.
Absolutely. And this is what makes you say, this is what we've been looking for half the year, because we've seen a lot of the growing pains in the first half of the season. You had a lot of young guys with not much experience, and everyone was just kind of trying to find out where they fit in the team, who's going to play where. And I feel like after the new year, the Hawks found their chemistry. They finally found what clicks with some of these young guys, with these veteran stars. So I think a lot of it was just a matter of finding what clicks correctly, and we're finally seeing it. And this is what makes the Hawks more dangerous than most, if not all, teams of the NHL, is the ability to have this depth from the top line to the fourth line that's reliable.
Yeah, and it's funny because, over the last few seasons, they lose several of their young players like Shaw and Saad, and you're like, all right, well, who's going to be the next guy that comes up? And they pull Panarin out of a hat, and you start to see several young players come up and play well. So it's really a testament to the Blackhawks system as a whole, and the Coach Quenneville and the way that he works things at the pro level.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give a lot of credit to the coaching staff right there, because, with every sport, that's what good coaches do, is they find guys to plug in when something leaves. Because let's face it, if you look at the team that won the cup in, say, even 2013, a lot of that team is gone. But we found ways to plug guys in, and, we've had more success. We won a cup in 2015, and we're playing for another cup this year. And, I'm thinking right now, and I look at the team right now. I look at the way they're playing. I look at the way they're stacking up. Right now, this is really the most confident I've felt in this team all year in winning a cup. And right now, as it sits right now, I think they could do it again this year with the way things are going.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a really good shot. I mean, you think about, most of the top teams, and they've fared pretty well against them. The only team that really scares me is the Washington Capitals, but we all know that they choke in the first round of the playoffs anyway.
Yeah,
they're the Ducks of the East.
Which is funny because they've both been coached by Bruce Boudreau at one point.
Yeah. So they scare me, but I don't see them making it to the finals.
Yeah, you know what? I think at the end of the day, as good as the Capitals are, I still would put my money on Pittsburgh in the East. That's who I still put my money on, is Pittsburgh.
Yeah, they're a really good team, and they're so star-studded, and they're a well-coached team. It's if they can get healthy, I probably see them in it again, or
Sure.
at least the conference finals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's kind of funny. It's kind of fun. They're still contenders, obviously. They're still going to be in the playoffs, but the New York Rangers have kind of fallen off the map the past few months. Because remember, when the season started, they had like a ridiculous goal differential, and they were going out and just beating opponents mercilessly. Like, they've kind of fallen off the map a little bit.
Yeah, so I pulled up the current NHL playoff matchups. In the East, first round matchups would be Montreal Canadiens versus the New York Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
Ottawa versus Boston. Washington Capitals versus the New York Islanders. And Columbus versus Pittsburgh, which would be a tough first matchup.
Yeah, it would. Now, I think the ceiling for the Columbus Blue Jackets, the sky's the limit for them right now, and I think they can do some great things. I just question this year with a lot of inexperience on that team. Maybe it's a downfall versus Pittsburgh, but at the same time, some of those guys, hint, hint, Brandon Saad, have gone on cup runs before, so that would be very tough for Pittsburgh. And I know that the two have matched up in the playoffs before, a few years ago, if you remember correctly.
Yeah, so that's going to be a fun series to watch. I mean, I usually don't watch any series in the West until after the first round, but that's a good one. There's a lot of good matchups over there.
Absolutely.
In the East. And in the West, first round, San Jose versus Calgary, which is an interesting matchup. And then Edmonton Oilers versus the Anaheim Ducks. Minnesota versus St. Louis. I see that one as a whitewash. And last but certainly not least is the Blackhawks versus Nashville, which I think that one's a whitewash too.
Yeah, we've met them in the first round in years before. This time we'd obviously have home ice advantage, unlike the last time. But yeah, I mean, the Predators, they got a good team there. But, it seems like the Hawks always find their weaknesses and exploit them. So I think it'd still be a great series, but my money would probably be on the Hawks in that series.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the season series so far this year is 4-1 Blackhawks in 5 games.
Right. Now, I got a question for you. I was recently writing an article about the Blackhawks and their cup run. Now, I want to see if you can agree or disagree. Just kind of give me some feedback on this thought I had. Let's say the Blackhawks win in the first round. Let's say the Minnesota Wild lose in the first round. Would you think it would be fair to say that the Hawks' path to the Cup Finals would probably be as easy as it's been?
Yeah, probably. I mean, Calgary is like they've played well. They don't have the horses for a playoff run.
Right.
Yeah. San Jose and Anaheim just isn't the same Anaheim this year. San Jose is good, but again, they're a choking team and they're not as good as they have been in years past. Oilers are an upstart team, but
very young.
I just don't see them going far enough to play the Blackhawks. So
right.
I don't know. It seems like there's no team that's standing in the way except for the Eastern Conference teams. It might be the toughest finals matchup that they've had.
Oh, sure.
But as far as the Western Conference playoffs, I think and that's a big if Minnesota loses in the first round.
Right, it's a hypothetical scenario.
Yeah, the Hawks should have as easy of a path to the Stanley Cup Finals as you can reasonably expect to have if Minnesota loses.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. When you think about the Cup Finals opponents we've had, they've progressively gotten harder. But every time we've beaten them in 6 games because, I mean, the Flyers were a team that squeaked in that just got unbelievably hot. The Bruins were a bit more of a stacked team that had a great comeback in the Game 7. And that Lightning team last year was really a force to be reckoned with. I mean, it was the first time the Hawks in the Kane and Tays era had to open up the finals on the road. It just feels like every time the Hawks get to the finals, the opponent gets tougher and tougher.
Oh yeah, and this year I would expect that the representative from the East is going to be a really tough team. I mean,
Absolutely.
if the Hawks make it, I mean, as far as the best hockey, you're probably going to see the best hockey versus the Washington Capitals, but I would really like them to see them match up with Montreal.
I was talking about that the other day with a friend. I would agree. Could you imagine that series?
I mean, number one, it's two original sixes, which is always nice to have. I think it's good for the sport. You get a Canadian team in there, which is really good for the sport.
USA versus Canada.
Yeah, and Montreal is a really good team, and there is a certain former Predator that knows the Blackhawks very well that is that you would see.
Yeah, you'd see Andrew Shaw. You'd see Shea Weber. You are familiar with Claude Julien because you've played him in the finals before as a member of Boston, so you kind of know the coaching style there, and he knows our coaching style. So, and you have two just major fan bases going at it. I mean, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and Crawford's hometown.
That's true. That's very true. Now, you know what's kind of funny as well is if you remember the last cup run, the last time they won the Stanley Cup, they were going into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak, and they were down to third place. They finished in third place the past 3 years. One of those years, they've won the Stanley Cup, and the other year, they should have won the Stanley Cup, but a fluky deflection off Alec Martinez off Nick Leddy ruined that. So my whole point about that is there are some people who are so stressing over the fact that the Hawks need to win the conference when I really don't think it's an absolute necessity. It'd be nice, but it's the Hawks, to me, this team could finish in a wild card spot and they still have a chance to win a cup. I truly believe that.
Yeah, it's my only concern with it is not that they need to have the number one seed going in. For me, it's having that cushion, so at the end of the season, you're not stressing about having to win games to make it to the playoffs, or having a cushion where hopefully it doesn't happen, but a Taves or a Kane gets a serious injury, that you can have a cushion of number of games to be able to just coast into the playoffs where you're not at the end fighting for a spot. It's nice to be able to push at the end of the season to keep yourself well oiled, but if you look at teams that like the Kings and some other teams that are good teams that really had to struggle to get into the playoffs over the last couple of years, it doesn't bode well for them going in the playoffs because they're so exhausted from that fight to make the playoffs. So it's just more of a keeping a cushion, so you can make the playoffs easily if something were to happen.
Yeah, and I totally get that, and that totally makes sense. I mean, luckily, when we talk about the Hawks scenario, they're making the playoffs. We know that. It's for the Hawks right now. I really looked at the standings, and it pretty much looks like it's going to be 1 or 2 for them. It's going to be the 1 spot or the 2 spot because the Predators are in the 3rd spot, but there's quite a cushion. I think it's a little over 10 points, at least I think when I looked at it. So they have that cushion at least. So, overall, I just think no matter if the Hawks finish 1st or 2nd, I don't think it makes as much of a difference for them, considering it doesn't seem like home ice really affects them that much these days.
No, they at this point with the veterans they have, it doesn't matter if they were to play every game on the road. They're going to play top level regardless.
Yeah, and you saw in 2015 when they opened 3 of 4 series on the road and they won the Stanley Cup. And a lot of people were chirping at the Hawks going in third place, mainly Predators, Blues, Wild fans. And then they were all gone by round 1 or 2, and we won the Stanley Cup. So, it just, to me, it just doesn't matter as much at this point. I mean, if they were battling for a playoff spot, obviously, to your point that what you said, because, yeah, you need to work your butt off to get into the playoffs. But for the case of the Blackhawks, you and I can both agree they're making the playoffs.
They're right now 16 points ahead of Nashville. Yeah,
that's quite a cushion. That's a nice thing to have. And, that nice win on Saturday night even helped that cushion. So, I'm really excited for playoff hockey again. I'm really feeling the excitement again, knowing what these fun runs that they've had the past few years, and most of them turning out great, with one of them really ending in heartbreak, but more good than bad. I would say.
It's got to be a little bit disheartening for the Minnesota Wild. Is they're playing as well as they've ever played, ever. I mean, not that old of a franchise, but they've played the best they've ever played, and the Blackhawks are 1 point behind them in the standings.
Yep, and they were once ahead by 10 points.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like that they've floundered. They're 7-3 in their last 10, which is pretty darn good, and they're still getting caught from behind. That's just got to be really disheartening for them.
Yeah, they had that bye week right after us, so when they had their bye week, we just won games, and that's really one of the main factors on how we caught up to them. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and I can't imagine what Wild fans think of the Hawks. I mean, they probably think we are the biggest bunch of cockroaches in hockey. I mean, when you think about it.
Probably.
I mean, it's like how Cubs fans felt towards the Cardinals for a very long time. It's how us Bears fans feel about the Packers the past decade.
Speaking of the Cardinals, did you see the Cardinals shirt where it's has the Cubs logo and said "Not our champions"?
Yes. I got a real kick out of that. That was so funny, because you're thinking your whole life you're never going to see something like this happen, and here you are. There's people salty about a Chicago Cubs victory, a Chicago Cubs World Series, something we've waited for our entire lives, and we're finally seeing it.
And it's hilarious is because everyone's like, oh, the Cardinals are the classiest baseball fans. But the minute they have the opportunity to be petty and small, they just leap at that opportunity. It's
right.
It's the one time you should be like, hey, listen, they won it. It would be like the Lions winning the Super Bowl, and you'd be like, you know what? I'm a Bears fan. Let them have it. Right. They're probably never going to win another one. But no, the Cardinals fans just have to be petty. They have to be small, and they have to take the lowest road.
I'll be completely honest, and this is not to trash talk any White Sox supporters, but I thought there'd be more pettiness from the White Sox than there were the Cardinals. It was completely the opposite. And the reason I say that towards the White Sox is, well, a lot of Cubs fans were bitter towards the Sox in 2005. We can admit that. And you have to deal with playing in the same city as the Cubs. And honestly, part of me would really kind of understand it. But when I look at how many Sox fans posted congratulatory things towards the Cubs, I was actually really... It made me really happy seeing, there was at least some sportsmanship from the other side, because, let's face it, there's not a whole lot of sportsmanship between the Cubs and the White Sox a lot of the times. But, man, for a team that has so much rich history in winning, and they're so petty about it. I mean, they have 11 World Series victories. I mean, just a few years ago, they were either going to the World Series or getting to the NLCS on a regular basis, and we finally do something, and it's like, geez, the pettiness is unreal.
Yeah, it's like the tables have turned, because the Cubs are in a position where they look like they could be contenders for a while, and the Cardinals are the Cardinals are in a little bit of a funk right now and not looking so hot, their prospects on the season.
Yeah, and you know what? To me, I'm going to be one of those people that kind of says, I don't feel sorry for you because you've been a force my entire life. You've been good my entire life. You've got one of the greatest histories in baseball. So, you know what? Sorry, you're going to have some not the greatest years. And, I mean, we saw it last year. And what's really kind of amazing to say is that an off year for the Cardinals was winning 86 games. That's still pretty good when you think about it. And that was a bad year for them.
Yeah, it's like the Yankees being bad. It makes you feel a little bit good.
Right, exactly. And it's like, you know, let's take a few years off from the Cardinals being good. I'd gladly take that. And, you know, it's as someone who's suffered through, and you even more, we've suffered through countless years where the Cardinals were on top and the Cubs were just a laughingstock, last place. You know, today I was recently looking at, I was having a conversation with some people, and we were looking at, like, the Cubs of 2010, the end of the Hendry era, and how embarrassingly awful they were. And meanwhile, the Cardinals were winning and doing great things, and we've seen that for much more than we've seen the Cubs over them. So, you know, it's kind of nice to have the shoe on the other foot this time.
Yeah, and I mean, even, you know, when you hate another team, what's even better than them just being terrible and sucking, because that just gets repetitive and boring. It's even more fun when they do something good and then blow it when it comes time. And the Cardinals had a lot of laughter at the Cubs' expense. The ball going between Leon Durham's legs, the Bartman game, the game after that, the blowing of the 69, the lead in 1969, and just so on and so forth. It's just every time the Cubs do something right, historically they blew it in epic proportions. And finally, the Cubs win, and they can't just be okay with it. They have to be children.
Well, it's like their whole world has been turned the other way around because they're so used to being the top dog and so used to us being the laughingstock garbage barrel. But, you know, I'd almost be like, you know, you don't have to like us winning the World Series. Just don't be so obnoxiously sour about it. Just worry about your own team. Because I feel like they're just right now. I almost feel like a lot of Cardinals fans, not all, but a lot, I feel like some are just waiting in a pouncing position, just waiting for the Cubs to screw up somehow. Like whether it's this year, if something goes bad, they're waiting to jump on the smallest thing. I mean, they're still talking garbage about Jason Heyward not hitting well, even though he won a World Series, won a Gold Glove, and had a locker room speech that might have helped win them the World Series. You know, he was on your team for 1 year. Get over it. You know, just worry about your own team right now, because right now your own team, it's looking kind of washed up right now.
Yep, it is not. They're not in a good spot right now, and there's a good chance that this team could be fourth in the division. Yeah,
I mean, I never thought I'd say I'm not scared of the Cardinals ever in my entire life, but I have never feared them less than I have this year. Because, I mean, let's face it, the Cardinals have had some fantastic teams over the years. And you have guys like Molina, you had guys like Carpenter and Wainwright and Albert Pujols and Matt Holliday in his prime, Matt Carpenter, along with Chris Carpenter. And you say, okay, they still have some of those pieces. They still have some good players, but a lot of those guys are either gone or they're past their prime effectiveness. Like Molina's battling injury problems. He's getting up there in age, and though he still hits well, you know, a good average, good on base, he he doesn't slug for power anymore. Those days are gone.
Yeah. It's a changing landscape of baseball. And you gotta roll with it.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't think Mike Matheny's a very good manager, and I know plenty of Cardinals fans who would agree with it.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of Cardinal fans hate his guts.
And I understand why. Because, I mean, he seems like just this... He's one of the guys you say, I bet you're a lot of fun at parties in a sarcastic way. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And it's... looking at what the Cardinals are right now, I've seen projections for them go anywhere from 78 games to 90 games. And I nowhere in me can I see the Cardinals winning 90 games this year. I can't do it. I can't see it. I think the Pirates will be the second best team in the division. And I think you'll see a turnaround with the Reds. And
Interesting.
I just think Milwaukee's they're building something there.
Yes, they are.
I just don't see the Cardinals being able to. They might go on a winning streak, but I can't see them sustaining something a whole season long enough to win 90 games. Because 90 games is a lot of games to win.
Right, and you know what? I'd say the Cardinals probably, to me, I think mid-80s is a reasonable place to put them. I kind of put them 85, 86 wins where you're above 500, you're a competitive team, but you don't have enough to win the division. And frankly, right now, when I think about it, and I have thought about it all off season, I've said this before, there's really no reason, unless there's a mass amount of injuries, the Cubs don't win the division. There is no team in this division right now that I think is more talented than the Cubs. I really don't.
Yeah, and the big concern with the Cubs, the only concern is, will there be injuries or regression in the starting pitching?
Right. That's a big, legitimate topic of conversation. Now, when I say big, I don't mean it's like a huge worry, but I know people are talking about it, and it's something you got to think about. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is. Anytime you have a pitching staff that went so long with no major injuries in a season, especially with the age of some of the Cubs pitchers, that it's really hard to fathom that happening again. I mean, the Cubs have done a very good job as a whole, as an organization, keeping pitchers healthy, but just, the law of averages with Major League Baseball.
Right. Another thing I'm going to say, when the Cubs and Cardinals play each other this year, obviously one of the most interesting things is going to be Dexter Fowler and what he's going to do against the Cubs. Because we've seen in the past, how many times in the past have we seen former Cub players absolutely just murder the Cubs when they played them again? So I think that's honestly the most interesting part about the Cardinals is seeing Dexter Fowler, and that was their big offseason move. They haven't really made any pitching moves, and they unfortunately lost Alex Reyes for the season, so that's a huge blow to their starting pitching staff. Other than that, it's like everyone's a year older. There's not that I know of a next upcoming made-up factory worker kid that is going to hit 300 like the Cardinals always seem to bring up.
Yeah. And another interesting thing for the Cubs, for me, is to see, when it really counts, Jason Heyward's new swing and see how that works out. I know historically, if you look at pretty much every season he's ever had in the pros, that first month of the season has been pretty rough. Last year he just never came out of it, but usually after that first month, he starts heating up and brings those numbers up to career numbers. I'm wondering if that same thing's going to happen this year, and how he's going to respond if he with a whole new swing and a new approach and how the hard work he's had if he slumps in the first month of the season.
Yeah, it's something that we're all thinking about. I'm confident that he'll turn things around this year, and I'm not looking for a 310, 335, or 385, I should say, on base. But, if we're looking at a 265, 270, 340, 350 on base guy, we'd gladly take it. Gladly take it. I've seen Heyward's new swing. There is a difference the way he holds the bat. It's still kind of a long swing, so to speak. But, we'll see where it goes. He had 2 hits today. He had a long home run today. And then he had an RBI double. He was 2 for 4. Those were his first hits of the spring. And it sounds like, from what I've seen, that he's had some hard contacts. It's just kind of been right at people. So, we're really hoping, and I'm hoping especially, that there's going to be some progress made.
Oh, yeah. You have... it can't get much worse, honestly. You can't get much worse. And as far as a long swing, I'm fine with a long swing. Mark Grace had a long swing. Will Clark had a long swing. And guess what? Those guys were really good.
Right. It's just kind of all how you move your body and shift your weight because, they were talking about last year, he had that long swing, but the way he was shifting his weight, he didn't square up the ball. He was getting on top of it or getting under it because you saw he hit a lot of ground balls and he hit a lot of pop-ups. He didn't strike out all that much, but a lot of his contact, it wasn't squared up, or if it was hit pretty hard, it was usually on the ground. So as long as you find that middle ground where you shift the weight and you can have a nice swing that squares up the ball better like he's had in the past, that's kind of, what you're hoping for because he's done it in the past. He's had some really good careers. Look at his career year with the Cardinals. He almost batted 300 that year. So, he's capable of doing this.
Yeah, and last year it looked like he had this weird hiccup in the middle of his swing, and it was a little bit cartoony with how his upper body and lower body weren't quite in sync. It looked awkward, and it almost looked like something hurt. Whenever you play a sport with something that's not injury enough where you're like, I'm injured, but it's, if you have a blister, like an open blister on your foot, you run funny and you don't run the same way you do and you don't plant like you do.
Right.
It looked like, like he just wasn't, something hurt and he wasn't willing to admit it.
Right, exactly. Because you saw the way he swiveled, I guess. Maybe that's the right word. But you know what I mean? Like, his lower body weight, his upper body weight, it looked like it was kind of off balance. Like, there wasn't really, they say balance and, keeping your head in and keeping your back foot sturdy is key. You need to open up your stance a little bit. And there was just a lot of moving parts that were going in different directions. It was almost like a gear system with gears going the wrong way. Yeah.
And I fully expect him to be better. And honestly, with the amazing bats that the Cubs have on this team, as long as he puts the ball in play, they're fine. You just got to keep out of the strikeout situations. And as long as he puts the ball in play, even if he's flying out or hard lining out, the Cubs are in a good spot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And he's got a good eye at the plate, too, so he still has the ability to draw walks.
Yeah, and if he gets on base, he's the best base runner the Cubs have.
Absolutely.
My another big question I have is, are the Cubs going to put Addison Russell in a position to get more RBIs this year? If you've heard him talk, since they've won the World Series, he said a few times, and not overtly, but he's mentioned that he's an RBI guy, and where they've had him batting is not conducive for being an RBI guy.
Yeah, we saw last year, we saw the numbers. People forget that he had 20 home runs and 90 RBIs, and I know I'm more towards the advanced metrics, and a lot of that doesn't look at RBIs, but I still like to look at RBIs. I still think there's something to say about a hitter's ability to hit under pressure and identify pitches that are pitched under pressure. And we saw him drive in 90 runs last year. That's a really good number, for especially when you're 22 years old. Now,
and you're batting in the 8th and 9th hole.
Right, exactly. I mean, it says two things. It says, A, he has the ability to be productive, and B, it shows how good this team is at getting on base. I mean, when you're down in the lineup and you got 90 RBIs, obviously there are guys getting on base in front of you. And look at the World Series. I mean, some of those hits that he had, those like the grand slam and the bloop double, I mean, those are some big hits that he had.
I mean, last spring training you heard Joe Madden and some of the other Cubs players talking about the amount of power he has and what a power hitter he is. And the kid is so young still that you don't lose that power, but once you go up a league, it takes a little bit for that power to come back because you're getting used to the hitting. I mean, look at Chris Bryant. He made a meteoric rise, but he's just starting to figure out his power. I mean, I think he's going to hit more home runs this year, barring injury, this year than he did last year. And I think Addison Russell, you're going to continue to see more home runs.
Sure. And I think you're going to see a little bit of a higher batting average as well. I know I look more at on base than batting average, but you're going to see him get more hits, and you're going to see him get on base a little more, as well as drive in more runs and slug the ball. Because like I said, he's only, 22, 23? And I have said this many times, he has one of the most beautiful uppercut swings of anyone I've seen on that team.
Yeah, and think about it is, you have Kyle Schwarber, hopefully in his first full major league season, and he is going to be a force to be reckoned with, and you can't pitch around everybody. So the number of bats that you have in this lineup is somebody's going to benefit from it. Somebody's going to get a pitch that they wouldn't normally get because you can't pitch around anybody.
Right. Heck, some of the pitchers you can't pitch around because look at guys like Arrieta and even Kyle Hendricks who can handle the bat fairly well. I mean, we don't have Jason Hamill anymore, which is too bad because he was a really good hitter. But some of our pitchers could even swing the bat, so that's even better.
Yeah, hopefully it's Jason Heyward that's the recipient of a lot of those pitches. Teams are going to be going statistically saying, hey, listen, he was easily their worst hitter last year. Let's pitch to him. You're not going to pitch to Contreras because he's got power to put it out of the park. You're not going to pitch
speed for a catcher on the base pads too.
Yeah, you're not going to throw one down the middle to Bryant or Rizzo or Schwarber because Schwarber's a guy that has one of the most beautiful swings and he's got 40 plus home run power.
Yeah, I mean, you make a mistake to any of those guys, they're hitting it to Milwaukee or Lake Michigan. So you definitely don't want to throw it right down the middle to them.
I was listening to a story about Kyle Schwarber, not him per se, but the first time that Jed and Theo were told about Kyle Schwarber, I'm sure they saw stats and things, but when somebody actually saw him live, they were like, what's his swing like? He said, Babe Ruth. And, everyone started laughing and he goes, I was being serious. And he's like, he's Babe Ruth. And I mean, it's a tall order there to call him one of the best hitters in baseball history. But just that raw power and that type of swing, and the guy is just a natural hitter.
Yeah, and at the age of 20, he was 21 or 22 in 2015. He hit a ball on top of that right field board. And after doing that in the wild card game of hitting one completely out of the stadium. And that is at a really young age with little experience. Imagine if he develops more, stays healthy, and matures. just think about what could happen.
Yeah, and he's got so much more room to grow. He went in after half of a season. He missed a whole season to an injury. Came into the World Series with not playing at all. What did he have? They said he went from doing nothing to he got cleared. So he went and took like 1,000 practice swings, and then came into the World Series against a pitcher that nobody could hit, and made solid contact and hit well.
Yeah, I mean, look what he did in the World Series. He was great. He got a lot of big key hits, and he led off the top of the 10th inning in Game 7 with a hit. And even the balls that he hit that were outs, he drove the ball quite far. I think there was once he hit a double, and it was just off the wall. Like, he just missed hitting it out. And this was, I think, his first game back. I think it was Game 1 when he hit that double. It's like he hasn't played an entire year, and he's nearly hitting home runs in the World Series against some of the best pitching. Like, that says a lot.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to pull up his stats quick. His first year, he had enough at-bats to qualify as a rookie, didn't he? So there's no way in his third season he could be Rookie of the Year, right?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how many at-bats he got. I remember he played like 60-some games, if I remember correctly.
Let's see. A player shall be considered a rookie unless during a previous season he has exceeded 130 at-bats. So, yeah, he exceeded that.
Yeah,
I think he had
that's what I thought.
About 200 at-bats.
That's what I thought.
So,
you know what's funny? His first major league hit and home run was in Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, that short burst of games he had 16 home runs in 60-some games. Like, just projecting that out is, nearly 40 home run a year guy, just based off of half of a rookie season. The kid has stupid amounts of power.
And in the postseason, like I said, what he did in the postseason, how many home runs did he hit? 4 or 5 in the postseason?
Let me pull it up. Postseason. He had home runs. He had 5.
Yeah, because he hit the 1 in the wild card game, he hit 2 in the division series, and then he hit 2 in the NLCS, because he had the 1 in Game 1 when they were down 4-1, and then he hit 1 in Game 3 that tied the game early and thought we still had a chance until Daniel the Devil Murphy took over.
Yeah, he hit 500 against the Cardinals. And he had 2 home runs, but those were his only 2 hits against the Mets.
Yeah, was those home runs.
And he batted 412 against the Indians in the World Series.
Isn't that amazing?
The funny part is,
to be fair to Schwarber in the NLCS, no one hit the Mets.
He's played 1 wild card series, 1 divisional round, 1 NLCS, 1 World Series, and they were in different seasons. They weren't all in the same season.
That's so funny. That is really, really funny.
I didn't even think about it, but I was just kind of looking at his stats on baseballreference.com.
Yeah. And I remember him with the Cougars because it was one of the last years the Cougars were affiliated with the Cubs. Just for the record, I really miss the Cougars being affiliated with the Cubs. But he was playing with the Cougars. It was in 2014, a year before he's called up. And he was hitting balls over that deck area with the picnic chairs. I don't know if you've ever been to a Kane County Cougars game. I'm sure you have. And you can picture that outfield deck that has kind of that cover over it, like that roof. I mean, he was hitting balls over that roof. And you could tell right away that this kid was going to be something.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And based off of his rookie season, if you project it out to 162 game average, he's at 37 home runs, 98 RBIs, a 353 on base, and almost 500 slugging, and an 850 OPS.
Yeah, that's not too shabby right there.
No,
not too shabby at all.
I know that the league frowns upon these, strikeout home run, guys, but when you throw in a on base percentage of over 350, it makes your ears perk up a little bit.
Right, you know what? Because there's a difference between a home run strikeout guy that doesn't have a good on base percentage, between a home run strikeout guy that does have a good on base percentage and draws a lot of walks. And early on in spring training, we have seen a lot of good patience from Kyle Schwarber at the plate, laying off breaking pitches outside or pitches tailing away. He's done a real good job of laying off that. So if he has a 350 plus on base percentage and hits a ton of home runs, if he strikes out a little more than average, so what? So what?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with that because, there's some big strikeout guys with the Cubs. Rizzo's a strikeout guy. Bryant's a strikeout guy. You've got strikeout guys on this team, but you have guys that have good eyes and get walks and they get on base.
Right. And what's so funny is that the Cubs are built to make games long. They're built to grind out at bats and keep getting on base. And this is when the Canoe Commissioner keeps wanting to speed things up. But honestly, between Joe Maddon's pitching style, or managing style, I should say, with both pitching and hitting, with the Cubs' hitting style, and just the way they play the game, they are built for long, slow games.
You know what? And here's my thing on long games. I don't care that the game is long. I just want them to, if it's long because there's, they're running up the score and it's a 17-11 game, and that's fine. It's more of a, all right, they brought out a pitcher, the starting pitcher came out and start the inning and threw 4 pitches, and then they brought in a relief pitcher, and then he has to warm up, and then he pitches to this one guy, and then they have to call in another guy, and then he has to warm up, and you throw over to first base 400 times. That's what I don't like, and I think that's what the commissioner is trying to get rid of too, is the downtime in games, because the younger fans, they want to see more highlight type things, and the more you pitch out, the more you do these things, it's pointless. And I know a lot of people are upset about the new pitch out rule, where if you want an intentional walk, you don't have to throw it 4 times. You just signal, and then the guy goes to first base. I'm fine with that. Why do I need to see him throw to a standing up catcher, so far off the base path that nothing can happen? Like, what am I gaining by that?
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. And I agree, because there are times when a pitcher will just keep throwing over to first, and that gets so long, or the guy they got to step out, they got to readjust their gloves, they got to toggle their bat, got to twist their foot, that all adds up. And you're absolutely right. It's probably the downtime is what they're most concerned about.
Yeah.
Also, the guys like Pedro Baez who pitch 1 pitch per minute, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I like, there's certain guys that when they pitch, the game just goes by quick because they have a fast rhythm. They go up there and they move quick. And there's not a lot of downtime between pitches. They don't walk around the mound and, grip the ball and then ask for a new ball and fuss with that ball. Just get up there and pitch. And it would be nice if they limited the number of throwovers that you can do in an at bat. And that should be part of the strategy. Is all right. You used up your pitch out. Your throws to first, and you think that guy's going to go. Well, then you got to do a pitch out and try to throw him out, and risk throwing a ball there. Like, it's one of those things. It's just things to speed up the game.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's always the debate over, is there going to be a pitch clock? And I truly don't think that's ever going to happen in the major leagues. I think a lot of pitchers would be very unhappy if that happened. But it's nice that there is a minor league system, especially the low A ball, where you could experiment with these kind of things. Now, I really think it'd be stupid to have the whole guy on second and extra innings things. I think that's unbelievably stupid. But, they try all this stuff out in a lot of these minor leagues or fall leagues and whatnot, and, at least there's some sort of trial and error without affecting Major League Baseball.
And the benefit of it, if you want to institute a pitch clock, is do it in the minors. And when these guys are coming up, the young players, is they grow into the system where they know, oh, there's a pitch clock, there's a pitch clock, there's a pitch clock. And when they come to the majors, they just work faster in general. Then you don't have to implement it in baseball. It's, baby steps.
Right, and it's not something you could really change everything overnight. Like you said, you got to take your time step by step.
Yeah, there's other sports that you can make, astronomical changes from one season to another, and people are fine. But baseball is not one of them.
Right, because it's so unique and it's so particular in the way it's played, where you could change one little thing and it's like, oh my goodness, everything is thrown off, where you see rule changes in the NFL constantly. Where in baseball, what major rule changes has there been, major changes, since like the designated hitter? You can't really think of one.
Yeah, I mean,
and that was 40 years ago.
Look at NFL. They changed the definition of a catch. If they were to do something that drastic in baseball, people would lose their minds.
Oh, my goodness. I couldn't imagine if they tried to somehow, some way, alter what's a catch. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in baseball. It lands in your mitt before hitting anything else, or it's not a catch. But, yeah, if they tried something different, there'd be a riot.
Or you have to tag everybody out. There's no more force outs or touching first base. You have to touch the player with the ball. People would lose their minds.
Could you imagine that?
I mean, I love the tradition of baseball, but at some point you have to realize that change at some level is good. You just have to find the right balance of change with tradition.
Sure, that's a very good point, because you could say the same thing about the way Wrigley Field is changing. I think all the changes are fantastic, but some people kind of are overly nostalgic about Wrigley Field. And look, I get it. It's Wrigley Field. It's a special place. But at the same time, changes need to be made. Now, I do think of one semi-big rule that was changed recently, and that was the Buster Posey catcher rule. But that one is a rule that I honestly don't like because of how subjective it is, and it's really not clear. Like the whole blocking the lane thing, it's really not clear to me what is allowed and isn't. I feel like some umpires on review of that are looser than other umpires, where you could slightly get in the way, they'll call obstruction, or you get well in the way and they won't call it. Like that's one thing I always really didn't like, if you want to count that as a semi-big rule change.
Yeah, and that was really just protecting the players, is because you can't lose a player of Buster Posey's magnitude in the game due to a play like that. Is you have to keep your stars on the field, and
right.
I get that, and that's fine, and you're right. It's not always clear, but it is, luckily it doesn't happen that often that it's that it affects the game that much. I mean, how often do you have a collision at the plate, or a play at the plate where there's it's not a one where the catcher's catching it on one side of the plate and then diving over to try to make the swipe.
Yeah, I mean, I get the whole safety thing, and you're right, you got to protect your star players. It's absolutely true. I just wish there was a better way of kind of determining what is and what isn't. But, with time, that could probably develop something better. Another thing that I really think needs to change, a lot of people would agree, I think they need a limit of review time. You need to have a limit of how long a manager wants to look at a play to challenge, And you got to have a time limit of how long an umpire looks at a play, because it seems like there were some calls last year that were blatantly obvious, and it took them like 5 minutes to review the play.
Again, I hate that the official on the field in any sport is the one that has to make the review. It's silly to me. It doesn't make any sense. It adds a lot of pressure when you have all the eyes on you and you're trying to look at a tiny little screen. It should go to a centralized place. Hockey does it right, even when they get it wrong. And the hockey officiating it's still far and away the best of any of the pro sports. It's been pretty bad this year, but I like that it goes to a centralized location because you have the official that's looking at it has no pressure, isn't feeling influenced or biased in any way. They watch it from multiple angles, from temperature controlled, where it's not like you're rushing it because it's cold or anything or raining. You just watch on a big screen, high definition TV, the best possible angles, slow motion, and boom, boom, boom. All right, there it is. Every sport, reviews should go to a centralized spot where they have the best equipment, the best conditions to watch it, and they can conference each other. Like you have two officials and be like, hey, listen, this is what I'm thinking. Oh, no, is this obscure bylaw rule that nobody knows about. If the ball hits a fan and bounces off onto the field, but in fair play, I want to see the right outcome. It's what I want to see. And the best outcomes come from the best vantage point of watching it with the least amount of bias and the least amount of pressure on the person doing it.
Yeah, you could have a lot of great resources in a war room type setting where you have, like you said, all the angles, best equipment. It'd probably be easiest to determine something fast and correctly because they could look at it from all angles. They say, okay, there it is. And within less than a minute, you got your call. So, yeah, I think that is something they do need to work on a bit. And I'm pretty sure that they will continue to evolve this process of review, because I remember when review was first put into place and it was really just on home runs. And then you started to get, the coach's challenge and the challenging safe or out or, stuff like that, or obstruction, whatever. And you almost can't help but wonder with all this, if and when are we going to come to the day where we have robots calling balls and strikes? Because there has been some really good points made. In this day and age, you have a lot more flame-throwing, crazy movement guys than maybe you did in the past. And it's hard for old human umpires to see the ball well at times to make a call, ball or strike. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you set up a little higher or a little lower than you did the inning before, it affects the way you see it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But going back quickly to...
I don't know how they do it.
I don't either. I wouldn't... And Rob Manfred has hinted that he it's something he's willing to consider at some point.
I had this idea, and I'm not a technical expert by any means, but could you have an umpire that wears a special mask, and it's like almost like a digital interface, and it has a strike zone, and you make the call based on where you see the ball cross that digital interface, almost like it's almost like if you had the ESPN strike zone graphic that's over the plate during the live broadcast. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
If you had that almost like on a mask, and you could see where the strike zone was. Like there was some sort of sensor built in the ground that had this invisible box where the strike zone is, and the umpire puts on a mask, and then you could tell which your balls are strikes. And also, if it was monitored, you could see how effective your umpires are being in calling balls and strikes correctly.
Yeah, and I'm fine even if you want to do a baby steps where you have a robotic type system where you're tracking balls and strikes in the strike zone, and you give it, not as a punishment, but as a teaching tool to every umpire, and be like, listen, here's the ones where you got wrong. Here's where you got it right. Here's where you're at least consistent when on the outside or inside, but here's ones where you are completely wrong and you're not even consistent with your own strike zone, and use that to get better. I'm fine with that. I'm more than fine with that, because officials are human beings, and every level they should get better. Just like a minor league player, as you go from single A to double A to triple A, you're progressing, and the pro umpires and referees should be the same way. Is they should keep working at their craft until they can't do it anymore and they start going downhill. Then you move on to somebody else. But baseball umpires they get like a life pass almost, and there's no repercussion and there's no known evaluation. They should be, it doesn't have to be a punishment thing where, like, you know what, you were only 75% in the strike zone, so you're going to be suspended. Then people get bullheaded and standoffish. Do it privately and be like, hey, listen, here's this new tool we have, and it's not to take your job away, it's to help you improve on your job. And I think,
right.
And if they don't, the results aren't public, and you have somebody sitting with you and be like, talk you through where you were right and where you're wrong and how to get better, then I think people are fine with that. I think most people are willing to receive constructive criticism. It's when it's framed as you're terrible at your job and we want to replace you, that people get standoffish.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I think that's the right attitude to approach that kind of thing. And you know what? If some of the old, like, Joe Wests and C.B. Buckner type people don't like it, then let them get the hell out of baseball, and then, maybe get some new, younger umpires who are more willing to make these kind of changes and have this kind of constructive criticism. Because, you've seen some of these guys, and Joe West is probably the biggest example. How long has that guy been umpiring Major League Baseball? Like,
yeah, and every sport has an official that they're above the officiating, and they don't care that everybody hates them and thinks they're bad at their job. They don't care. They just do it. Was it Joey Crawford in the NBA?
Oh yeah, he was around for a while.
He was so bad, and he just didn't care. He tried to make the game about him. He was terrible at calls, and you were just like, nobody liked him.
And you know what? You could tell that some of those calls that he were making poorly, he did that on purpose. He wanted to make the game about him. He wanted to create imbalance.
Absolutely. Little bit of White Sox. The White Sox outright released Brett Lawrie.
Yeah, I'm kind of not surprised. They're trying to bring up these new young kids. You have Yoan Moncada, and I kind of said on Twitter the other day, if I were a White Sox fan, I wouldn't be overly devastated by Brett Lawrie. I mean, I don't know. That's just me.
Not that you need him on the field to play. It's at least you had a veteran guy. You can't, the young guys have to learn from somebody. You have to have some veterans on the team. If Tim Anderson is going to be your veteran, that's not good. And so either Brett Lawrie had like a bad attitude, or they just really couldn't count on his health, and they thought his injuries were worse than they were portrayed, and they didn't expect to have him much this season. That's the only thing I can think of, is one of those two things. Because if you expected him to be fairly healthy and he had a good attitude, his contract wasn't that much money that it was worth to dump it. So I'm not sure. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going to happen when Moncada's called up. I don't know if it's going to be May, if it's going to be June. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be sometime this year. I know Brett Lawrie he's an interesting character. Let's just say that. He's an interesting character, and very high energy, can be a little goofy sometimes, can be how do I say it? Kind of blue collar a little bit sometime, if that's the right word I'm looking for. But I don't really know if there was ever a huge issue with his attitude that I knew about. I mean, and it's also kind of hard to gauge considering he played like a third of a season before being injured for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a pretty bad track record as far as injuries go. I don't think he's ever played a full season.
Yeah, I honestly don't know his full season and non-full season ratio, but I do know he's battled a lot of injuries, and maybe they just didn't think it was worth keeping him around. Maybe they just wanted to make as much room for the young guys as possible. And that also brings me to a point that Rick Hahn made. I think it was either yesterday or today. I saw it today, but he could have said it yesterday. I don't know. He said, we really need your patience with this. He said, I'm not guaranteeing a 2-year rebuild here. And I feel like some fans are really not sure, rightfully so, because you really don't know for sure how long this is going to take. Because there are some fans thinking that this is going to be a fairly quick turnaround, and there are some fans thinking it's going to take, more than 3 years. And, for me right now, I see it as it's going to take a few years, but it's not going to be like a 5-year project like the Cubs, because they've gotten a lot of assets at one time, and a lot of them are near major league ready. So I think they're definitely going to be on the uprise fairly quick. But when it comes to having a full unit and contending, some people are saying, oh, maybe 2018, and I don't know if it's going to happen that fast, because you gotta put together a full team there. But he's basically just saying it's going to take as long as it takes, and I think that's a good way to put it. He'd rather take the time to do it right than to rush things.
And it's better to, as John Fox always says, better to underpromise and overperform than the other way around.
That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true.
And Brett Lawrie is 2011, he was in 43 games. 2012, 125, 107, 70, 149, and 94.
So the year before, when he was with the Blue Jays, that was basically his career year for the number of games played.
It was Oakland.
Oh, was it Oakland?
Yeah,
okay.
He played the one season with Oakland, so it was 149 was his highest. And
okay.
And he had a 300.
That's right. That's
300
right.
OPP.
It was Oakland.
Yeah, he had a nice year on him, and with the White Sox, I mean, he didn't have a bad year last year, other than the injuries. But he batted right around his career average, right around his career on base percentage, right around his career slugging, right around his career OPS. I mean, other than the injuries, yeah.
And when you think about Brett Lawrie and you look at his career averages, you know what they are? They're average. They're literally average numbers. He's a 260, 320, I think around that kind of career hitter, at least for a lot of the career years that he had. He's not a bad player. He's just not, an all-star.
Yeah, I mean, his last year he was a 1.3 WAR, so he was pretty much like an average player.
Right.
Slightly the thinnest margin above. So, yeah, I don't know if his injuries were worse than they expected or what, but I mean, I know they're pretty stacked at second base, but what's he's not making that much money. It's like less than $2 million a year.
There was another thought that I heard from someone, that there was this kind of idea that they thought that they were going to be, and I don't know if it's a really good way of thinking. I don't even know if it's true, but this was just a theory someone came up with, that they thought they were going to be almost, quote, too good, where in this rebuilding year, they want individual veterans to have good seasons for trade bait, but they didn't want to have a team that could be fairly competitive because there's that kind of hope you want to get a good draft pick. I don't really know if that's valid, but I thought it was interesting someone brought that up.
I mean, I don't know if they're willing to dump a player for nothing for that reason, but I'm sure that they want to be as bad as possible now while they're developing guys. but have guys have a good. You want to be able to trade high. My one concern is you seeing a lot of backlash in the White Sox is because they haven't traded Quintana and or Todd Frazier.
Mm-hmm.
Like they feel like this is still a rebuild. Those guys are on the block. They're not going to trade them unless Todd Frazier, they want to get something for him. I don't think the market's there. That he's a trade deadline guy for a team.
He's the definition of a trade deadline guy.
But Quintana is a valuable asset, and
extremely.
And theoretically, he's got 4 more years under control. You feel like you're going to be competitive within those 4 years. So he's under enough control where if you don't get something astronomical for him, is why not hang on to him and have him be the veteran, pitcher to lead your young starting rotation when you're competitive in a couple years.
Right, because there's a lot of teams, or a good number of teams, that would die to have a guy like Quintana. And a name that you heard tossed around a lot was the Houston Astros, because they got a heck of a lineup. They still have a good farm system. They just need some more starting pitching, and Quintana would be the perfect place to start. So there are teams out there that would suit Quintana really, really well. Just nothing has really come across. And there's a number of theories, and I'm sure you've heard the theory that I don't buy in, that this whole process, this whole rebuilding process is intended to be a half rebuilding process, and that the main goal was just to get rid of Eaton and Sale because they were royal pains in the ass. I really don't buy that, but that's what some people are saying. Honestly, I think it's just because there hasn't been a mutual agreement. I mean, Rick Hahn wants the freaking moon for this guy, and people want Quintana really bad. They just don't know if they have enough to get him. So I just don't know if there's been a mutual agreement yet. And I think there will be at some point. There just hasn't been there yet. You don't want to make a trade for the speed and sake of making trades. You want to make a trade knowing it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. And it's silly to think that they just made the trades for Sale and Eaton because they're a pain in the butt. They are. They totally are. And that made it easier to get rid of those guys right away. But they've established that this is going to be a complete and full rebuild. And they're going to do it the right way. And I think over the last few years, you saw a power struggle between Kenny and Rick Hahn, and finally Rick's way of doing it is going to win out of completely rebuilding. And you're going to see more guys get traded. And they're going to bottom out in salary, save that extra money until they can get into free agency. And that's going to be a big thing, is will the White Sox pony up enough money when they get these young guys into place to bring in high price free agents to help. You can't win it on homegrown talent alone.
Right, because you look at the Cubs. They got a lot of homegrown talent, but they had to make some big signings. They signed Jason Heyward. They signed John Lester. They made some trades for guys like Arrieta. They signed John Lackey. So yeah, I'm totally with you. I don't buy that theory at all. I think it is kind of silly. It's just a coincidence that they haven't been able to, get a deal ready yet because they haven't found something right. So, when's the time gonna come when the Sox are gonna start going after free agents? And this is gonna be a time where it's like they're gonna really go hardcore after free agents if they need to fill in those gaps, because we've seen in the past when they weren't rebuilding but retooling, where they're like, oh, we're interested in Yoenis Cespedes, but we're not going to offer him anything over 3 years. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. The Chicago Bulls. They exist. Let's move on.
They just missed the wide open dunk. So, yeah, let's move on.
I'm so sick of talking about the Bulls. So then the last but certainly not least is we're starting to get a little bit of heat with the Chicago Bears. They added another quarterback to their roster. They signed Connor Shaw to another I haven't seen the terms of the deal, but he tweeted out that he re-signed with the Bears, which I was absolutely. That was my lock in off-season moves, is that they're going to bring Connor Shaw back because they liked him a lot, and he was going to be low price because of the injuries and lack of production. But they really like him, and I think they see him as somebody that they're going to try to develop, either into a solid backup or a potential starter someday.
Yeah, because when they did that, I figured, well, okay, depth move. Go ahead. I know some Bears fans are like, what do you mean? Does that mean we're not going to draft a quarterback? Does that mean we're not going to trade for Garoppolo? It's like, no, calm down. You need some string quarterbacks.
Yeah, he's a guy that if you put him on your practice squad, if you end up with two quarterbacks that are better than him, you could put a Connor Shaw on the practice squad, and nobody's going to go and take him because they have to move him to their active roster, and that's not going to happen. But if he shows some flashes, then you carry the third quarterback, and it's never a problem to have too many quarterbacks. Never, ever, ever.
Right, exactly. You need depth there, and especially in a game where a lot of guys are getting hurt, and it's a passer-friendly game, you need that depth.
Yeah, and it also, when the reality was, prior to the other day, you only had one quarterback under contract, and his name was Jay Cutler. So it made it really hard for you to do anything with him because then you have no quarterbacks on your roster. It's a really tough position to be in, even if you have a bad backup or whatever the case may be, is at least you have somebody on the roster who knows your system and could perform if need be. But if you were to cut Cutler last week, the team had 0 quarterbacks under contract. 0. That's a bad place to be in because you have to then
extremely bad, yeah.
In a league where there's not even enough starting quarterbacks for half the teams in the league, you have to go out there and get 2. Not a good spot.
Yeah, because you're looking for talented guys, and those kind of quarterbacks just don't grow on trees. It's hard to just say, oh, go out and sign a good quarterback. Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, and evaluating a quarterback is really tough because at least with other positions it's you can narrow down the traits that when you project them to the NFL level, you can identify certain traits that are fairly characteristic of somebody that can make that transition. It's not an exact science, but there's positions where you're much more likely to hit than miss, and quarterback's just not one of them. And it's getting worse and worse because of the way that colleges run the offense. Is college football has become less about being a feeder into the NFL as it has been a big money program if you just want to win. So it's much easier to take really athletic, fast guys and put them in a system to do well that isn't making them better for the NFL. And that goes with quarterbacks as well. I know a lot of people are really high on Deshaun Watson, but the guy throws a ton of interceptions. He doesn't read defenses. So when he goes into the NFL, and the thing is, I've heard multiple scouts, and I've talked to a few scouts that have told me, this has always stuck with me, is you're never going to throw for a higher completion percentage in the NFL than you do in college. So if you've got a guy that has problems with completion percentage in college, you're probably not going to get better in the NFL. And Deshaun Watson, he lit up Alabama twice, but guess what? He had a ton of interceptions, completion percentage not that great, and he doesn't know how to read a defense. So what happens when you have these absolutely phenomenal defensive coordinators game planning for him? They confuse the crap out of him, and he doesn't know where to go.
Yeah, there's a lot of red flags that I've seen right there. And it's unfortunate that the Bears are in a situation where there's not that young stud quarterback or class of quarterbacks that we've seen in the past, like, say, what was it, 2011 with Andrew Luck and RG3 and some of those guys. And then, other drafts with, like, Blake Bortles and Derek Carr. If there was more people like that, then you'd pretty much seal the deal that they'd be going after a quarterback like that in the first round. But, that's really not the case this year with the draft.
Didn't Derek Carr fall to the second, though?
Oh, he might have.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but
he was one of those things where people were high on him, but they had a lot of red flags. And, and you can succeed anywhere in any round, but it's so hard to project. And so many first round quarterbacks are absolute busts. And the Bears, according to reports, have like multiple plans in place. So if plan A doesn't go through, they've got a plan B and a plan C. And apparently plan A is to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. But Adam Schefter came out and he must have it from a really important source, but he is absolutely steadfast saying the Patriots are not going to trade him. No way.
Yeah,
no
and that news is breaking all over the place, especially in Chicago, just because, Jimmy Garoppolo has talked a lot about here. And you know what? I don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be like in the future. I don't. But, maybe we would have dodged a bullet. I don't know. I really don't know. There's so much uncertainty with Garoppolo, and you wouldn't want to trade away either an important asset, an important draft pick, or both for someone who's really unproven in a long term, because he played a few games. He played in a Bill Belichick system. He did pretty well, but can he sustain that?
The one good thing
can he sustain it in another market?
The one good thing I can say is that the Bears, the last 2 seasons, have had joint practices in the preseason with the Patriots. So they've seen Jimmy Garoppolo in practice more than any other team than the Patriots. So
well, that is true.
That's at least something. You've for total of almost 3 weeks, you got to see this guy day in and day out. At least gives you some kind of indication, and plus you have the game film from preseason and those 2 games he started in place of Tom Brady, or 3 games. He only finished 2, I think. But it's the one thing that you do gain is how to work, because you were under Belichick and Brady, and that's a trait that you can bring with. So I don't think he was the end all be all and is going to be the most amazing guy ever, but it does, bringing a quarterback from that system that they're very high on is definitely a plus. But he's, for all intents and purposes, off the table. The second plan B is Mike Glennon, and I don't know what to feel about that.
Yeah, I've been seeing the talks about that kind of since the Garoppolo stuff died off with what was said about him. Yeah, again, just kind of more uncertainty. You said it perfectly. I don't know what to think about that.
Yeah,
I really don't.
And you know what? I liked what he did in his rookie year, but he hasn't had a lot of playing time since then. But the thing is, the reports are that he's going to get like $15 million a year, and that's a lot of money for a quarterback that you're not sure of. I think, leads right into option 3, which is Brian Hoyer. And I don't love Brian Hoyer, and he is like the definition of a stopgap, but at least exactly what you have in him. Is
exactly, you know what you're getting.
Yeah, it's you've milked that cow. And he doesn't turn the ball over, and between the 20s, he's very good. He moves the ball between the 20s. It's just once he gets to the red zone, he really struggles because he doesn't want to force anything. But if you have Connor Shaw, who you really like as an upside young quarterback, and you bring in a veteran who is definitely able to start even the whole season if need be, in Hoyer. And if you identify a quarterback that you like in the second round, that's not the worst place to be. Is you've got three different routes, you're developing quarterbacks, and you've got somebody that could start if need be, and he's been a backup if need be.
Right. I think a lot of the skepticism from a lot of us Bears fans comes from the fact that there's not much trust in developing a quarterback because the Bears have never really done it before. I think that's where a lot of the skepticism comes from. Obviously not 100% of it, but I think that's where a lot of it comes from. I think the only option we have right now is to give this team a chance to be able to do it no matter who they get.
And I think, everybody is waiting for this one magic player who's going to turn it all around for us. And I don't know if that player exists right now that you can get. So the smart play is pulling in multiple options so you have more odds of somebody hitting. And if you bring in a draft pick or two, you bring in either a Glennon or a Hoyer who has started in this league, and you've got Connor Shaw who you like, who has some experience in this league and is, you feel is a guy that you wanted to develop, and you dabble in all of those, is you're more likely to hit than you were if you just went, this is our guy and we're anointing him.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people looking for the next Aaron Rodgers type player, like you said, but
they don't come along very often.
No, they don't. They really don't.
Yeah, it's people are like, they drafted Tom Brady in the 6th round. It's like, there is exactly one Tom Brady ever in the history of football.
Right, Tom Brady's. You don't look at, there's one Tom Brady, there's another Tom Brady. No, there's only one.
I mean, you get a lot of Christian Ponders. You get a lot of RG3s. You don't get a lot of Tom Brady's. There's one Tom Brady.
Ryan Leaf.
Yeah, you get a lot of Ryan Leafs. You look at the way the Seahawks did is they brought in a high-priced free agent, then they drafted Russell Wilson, and then they signed a quarterback who had some experience in the league, and Tavares Jackson had started but had been traveled on a couple of other teams since then. And they went with 3 options, and one of them really came through. And that's sort of what I think the best case scenario for the Bears is competition and multiple eggs in multiple baskets.
Right, because you want to build a complete team. You don't want to say, we want to draft this one superstar and he's going to carry the team. No, you want a team with depth. You want a team that works together, and you want to have options, because you don't want to be one of those teams where you have just this one good option, and if something doesn't work, then the whole thing is screwed. No, you want to have multiple options so you could go different routes, and being able to find what works and work it through a process, it's much more reassuring.
Yeah, and the Bears apparently have, from the reports I'm hearing, have a plan in place for the free agency. They definitely have a quarterback plan, but apparently they're very interested in Stephon Gilmore, the cornerback from Buffalo, who I liked a lot coming out of South Carolina in college. They're looking at offensive tackle Ricky Wagner, because apparently, and rightfully so, they're not happy with their tackle positions. So you'll have 3 tackles under contract unless you cut somebody, and competing for 2 spots. And they've already re-signed Daniel Brown, Bryce Callahan, and Josh Bellamy.
Yeah, Ryan Pace likes to make the point clear that they have a lot of cap room, and they have a lot of flexibility to work with cap room. So, I'm interested to see what happens here in free agency. I mean, we know that in the NFL, it's not like baseball or hockey or basketball where a lot of big key moves are made in free agency. It's just, you don't see this all-out free agent sweepstakes, I guess, way to put it, where you'd see in basketball, baseball, or hockey. But when you have a lot of cap room and you're in a transition phase, you got to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to have a little bit more cap room because Eddie Royal's about to be cut, according to all reports. And Cutler is either going to be traded or cut. And Alshon...
They've been shopping him for a while, right?
Yeah, and I have a feeling that they're probably going to keep him around until after the draft. Because at that point, they're going to probably have another free agent quarterback of some sort, either Glennon or Hoyer, and then they'll have draft somebody. And if they couldn't trade him at the draft, then boom, he's going to be gone because they'll already have 3 quarterbacks, and they're not going to bring in a 4th malcontent to the camp.
Right, that's a smart thing to do because you want all your available resources with you during the draft. So, like I said, this is going to be one of the most interesting drafts the Bears have ever had. It's almost like we didn't look forward as much to the actual football play this year of the Bears. It was the draft and what they're going to get for the future.
Yeah, and after for me, it was a lock. Myles Garrett goes number 1 in the draft, and after the combine, he basically solidified that unless he gets in a car accident and breaks, his neck or loses a leg or lights a bunch of fireworks and blows his hand off, he is going to be the number 1 pick. So now it comes down to, all right, Bears have the 3rd pick. We already know who number 1 is. So it's basically you have your choice of everybody else but Myles Garrett and one other guy. And who's that guy going to be for you? The bad news is, and I was saying that I was really high on Jonathan Allen, but then after I really watched the game film, I softened on him a little bit. He's starting to hear reports that he has early onset arthritis.
Yeah, wasn't it in his wasn't it in both arms too? Like it was more serious than people thought.
Yeah, and that's not good. That really makes me kind of push him off. Out of my big board, as far as number 3. There's so many good players in this draft that I don't know if I risk it for him. I think you can get another amazing player and have him be, and at that number 3 spot that really impacts your team, like an impact player. Because I think last year I said the first round sort of sucked in the draft, but there was a lot of players later on that I thought were solid players. And so far that's proving right. And there's other years where basically if you don't get something in the first round, you've got hot garbage for the rest of the draft. And I think this draft is going to be that first round is going to be great. It's going to be one of the better first rounds we have in a while. And I think those first 3 rounds are going to be solid. And then after that, it's really going to fall off. So the Bears are in a good position with the number of draft picks they have early in the rounds.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's a question that I have going into the draft about the Bears.
Okay.
What do they still value defense first? Because that's kind of the thing I've been hearing for a while. Even if it's not Allen because they see the red flags because of the injuries, do they feel that going after the best defensive player is still in their best interest?
I honestly feel that the Bears are going to go with the best player available and not look at needs. And if they do that, they're going to draft a defensive player because this is very top-heavy defensive players and a lot of impact guys. And I think also that all of the most safest picks are defensive players as well. So it just kind of adds up that they're going to go with a defensive player. And there's some nice edge rushers in there. There's also a lot of nice safeties. So the Bears have options, and I think most of them lean towards, the defensive players.
Yeah, because, we were talking about the Bears and the safety issues, and they haven't had a good safety in a long time, and that's something I'd really like to see them get. I want to have some good safety depth out there. I don't have to rely on an inexperienced Crave LeBlanc to cover elite receivers and be left out there to dry, because we've known what happens. And I'm not saying Crave LeBlanc is bad, but he's not a star-studded safety that some of these young guys coming in the draft are. So, me personally, that's something I'd really love to see.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many good, like, stud defensive players that I think the Bears would be silly to go offense in number 3. I don't think any of the wide receivers are worth it. You already have a good running back. So it doesn't make any sense to go after like a Leonard Fournette, even though I think he's phenomenal. And there's no offensive lineman that I'm that enamored with that early. So you're not going to draft a tight end at number 3. So I just don't. It leaves either a quarterback, which I think you're overdrafting a quarterback in that position, or a defensive player.
Yeah. And, because a lot of people are saying how, the Bears, if they want to address the quarterback, they got to do it in the first round, despite what some of the scouts and experts are saying. And, if you're a rebuilding team and you want depth everywhere you get, isn't it important to take what's best in front of you? And it seems like a lot of the best is defensive. So, I don't think the Bears are going to trade their pick. I really don't see it right now, but you never know.
You know what? It's one of those things is that if you get a deal you can't refuse, then you take it. If somebody's willing to give you 2 first-round picks in this year's draft for your one, and even sweeten the pot with a second round or a third round pick, you have to consider that. Especially if you look at your big board and feel that some people are going to overdraft offensive tackles and overdraft quarterbacks, then that's you can get a really good defensive player that might fall to you, like a Jabril Peppers. You can get him if you trade with Cleveland for their next year's number 1 plus this year's second number 1 plus their number 2 or something along those lines. Is you still get a great guy at number 12 or whatever they picked.
Sure.
And you get the first pick in the second round, which is basically like a late first rounder. You could probably get one of the great safeties in the number 12 spot and get the quarterback you want and still have your original number 2 pick and a number 1 next year. So I don't know. There's options. I don't think they're going to trade back just for the sake of trading back. It's going to have to be somebody gives them value.
Right. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I don't think it's part of their initial strategy, but if they found something really, really good, then sure, they might pull the trigger, but like you said, they wouldn't do it just to do it.
I just don't.
Overall, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just don't see that anybody has the ammunition to get that number 3 spot from the Bears. And
right.
Because they're going to want some immediate impact, and I just don't feel that anybody that's willing to trade is going to pony up for that spot this year. You can offer future first rounders, but I think the Bears want to get something this year. At least a bunch this year, and then if you added a first rounder next year, but you'd have to add another first rounder this year and your second round and third round, and you maybe 2 future first rounds. You have to give up a lot, and the Bears has to be front loaded.
Exactly. So, just overall, this draft, when you look at all the scenarios, it's so wide open. There's so many things that can happen with them. And that's kind of one of the things when you're a rebuilding team and you need to make a lot of changes and you do a lot of different things to move forward with the future. It seems like the scenarios for the Bears are constantly changing, whether it's talks from NFL scouts or people into the front office. So, there's really nothing set in stone until it actually happens.
Yeah, and then the last two things I want to talk about is the Bears didn't franchise Alshon Jeffrey. Basically, they feel that they can bring him back for a cheaper amount of money over a long-term deal, and Alshon's people probably value him a little too high, especially after the contract that the Steelers gave their wide receiver. So I have a feeling they're just going to let free agency start, let somebody offer Alshon a lot of money, and if somebody just goes bat poop crazy and offers him a ton of money, then the Bears walk away and probably try to sign Pryor or draft somebody. And if the market isn't as hot as Alshon's people thought it would be, then they're willing to make a reasonable type contract to him.
Because there's a lot of talk about Alshon Jeffrey, and there's been talk for a while now saying, does he not want to come back? Does he want to leave? Does he not like it here in Chicago? Does he not want to play with John Fox / in Chicago? So it's creating so much speculation over what Alshon Jeffrey's future is. And, it's kind of funny because he started as this young stud receiver that everyone thought was going to be here for a long time. And now it's like, well, he's franchise tagged. He gets suspended for PEDs. They're not going to put him on the franchise tag. What's going to happen to him? Is he going to leave? Is he going to sign another deal? It's, again, there's a lot of paths that can happen here.
Yeah, and the Bears are taking a gamble by letting him put his feet in the free agency waters, because you may not get him back. So the Bears must really have a number that they think he's worth, and if he goes over it, then adios. And if he goes in the ballpark that they're comfortable with, then they re-sign him. And I think he's a lot more open to coming back in recent weeks than he had been previously. I think once he saw that free agency was really coming up, I think he got a little scared and was, and was like, you know what, I like it here, and I don't want to just go anywhere. So I'm going to go, there's a 50-50 chance that he comes back.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, because part of me thinks he could come back on another deal, but part of me thinks he's also going to leave. So, yeah, 50-50 for me, because I really don't know.
Yeah, and I know the Bears have a backup plan at that wide receiver position. I don't think they're going to be so blatant and blasé about, well, he's going to come back or we'll be fine without him. I think that they have a plan in place. Kevin White's not going to be the lone wide receiver that they put all their eggs in his basket. They're going to have somebody else there as well. If it's not Alshon, it's going to be somebody that has experience in this league.
Right, and you kind of ask yourself this question: if Alshon goes, and we have to rely on, not really rely on, but if you're looking at Kevin White to come back, and you're looking at him to be your next kind of young leading receiver, along with, say, Cameron Meredith, what does that change the course of how the Bears draft in the later rounds? Will they be looking at more wide receiver depth? Will they be assessing more on that front? It makes you wonder. I guess it depends on what happens with Jeffrey and when.
Yeah, and I mean, Terrell Pryor is still out there, and he's a guy that, is pretty dynamic. You could always take a flyer on Josh Gordon, because if he's healthy and drug-free, he's a hell of a receiver. There's Kenny Britt, who is a 1,000-yard receiver, and he's still in his 20s. So there's other options. It's just I think they would like. I mean, there's also Michael Floyd. Off the field issues, but good wide receiver. Torrey Smith, 28 years old. So there's other options. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was every week we cover one position in the NFL draft, and we talk about a few players in there. And I don't watch highlight films. I actually watch game film. So I see every play, every snap that the player is involved in, and I watch multiple games over the season. This week is offensive tackle, and next week will be cornerbacks, and then so on and so forth. So if you guys have players that you are interested in learning about, definitely hit us up on the social medias or email. And if it's a position that we've already done, I'll cover it next week, and just lump it in with the cornerbacks next week. But if it's a position that we haven't talked about yet, like quarterback or safety, then I'll put it on the list of players and do it in that week. So this week is offensive tackle, and the first guy I looked at was Big Cam Robinson out of Alabama. 6'6", 326 pounds. He's got really great size, prototypical size for an offensive tackle in the NFL. He was dominant in college at left tackle, even against a guy like Myles Garrett, who's going to be the #1 pick this year. He's a 3-year starter, really good arm length. But if you watch his footwork, it's really forced. Like it's not natural. Like he learned footwork, and it's like he's thinking about it every time he does it. It's not natural. He doesn't use his hands particularly well. As an offensive lineman, you want to be able to use your hands well to ward off the defender. So if he tries to do a rip move or whatever, or a spin move, you've got him in front of you, and you want to be able to use him as like a jackhammer to shove him back, and keep him off balance. He doesn't use his hands well, and it's for a guy who has really good arm length. And one of the big indicators for an offensive lineman is his arm length, because guys with short arms aren't very successful at offensive tackle in the NFL. They can move to center or guard, but they don't succeed at tackle. And he has the traits of a guy with short arms, even though he has long arms, because he plays very T-Rexy. He gets lost in blocking schemes too much. If it's too complicated or it's not clearly evident who he's supposed to block, he gets a little bit lost. And he appears to lack upper body strength. And that was further enhanced in my mind, is that he didn't do the lift with the rest of the offensive linemen at the NFL Combine, which is a red flag for me, because if you have something to hide with the bench, when that's offensive and defensive linemen is like, everybody watches that in the Combine. So if you feel like you're not going to be very good at it, you don't want to spotlight that. So the fact that he didn't do it, in my mind, shows that he's got a lot of lack of upper body strength. My notes on him, I just don't see him as an NFL left tackle. I think he could be a pretty good right tackle, but someone is going to overdraft him. They're going to draft him way too high. Last year, I called Jack Conklin the safest pick in the draft, and Cam Robinson has a lot more question marks than he does answers. I think I call him my anti-Conklin. So somebody's going to overdraft him, and he's going to underperform. And Conklin was, I think, underdrafted and overperformed. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, you pretty much summed it up.
Next was Ryan Ramczyk, 6'6", 316 out of Wisconsin. He's a pretty athletic guy, especially considering that size. Nice strength. Pretty fast out of his stance. Good skills mirroring. But he lets too many defensive linemen get their hands in on him. And once that happens, they can shed you much easier, or you're susceptible to spin moves, susceptible to inside moves, and if they don't get away from you, you're more likely to hold. So that's something he's going to have to work on, and he needs to be really careful of holds. He committed a lot of them he didn't get called on, but when you watch the film of him and you're just focusing on him, you realize how many holds he got away with that he's not going to get away with in the NFL. He's only has 1 year of major college football experience. Medicals on him are going to be really high because he had a torn labrum in his hip. And I know that's not an injury that's career threatening, but you need your hips to be an offensive lineman, and if you've got a lot of pain from a torn labrum in it, you're going to end up being a hip bender rather than using your you're going to be a waist bender rather than using your hips. But he's got a really high upside, and he's going to have to work on his hands a lot. But I see him as a legitimate left tackle in the NFL. Anything you want to add?
Nope, I got nothing.
Next is Taylor Moton, 6'5", 330 pounds, out of Western Michigan. I love offensive tackles coming out of college because you can get some really good ones from small schools. So if you look at starting tackles in the NFL, you'll see some oddball schools, and I like that. I like that, it's not just the powerhouse schools. The pros on him, he's got great size, fairly athletic, played very well at right tackle. But he's got fairly short arms, which doesn't bode well, and not a lot of great upper body strength. And you saw him, he gets stood up too much, so he ended up getting stood upright. And as an offensive lineman, you want to win the leverage battle. He's a leg driver only, so sure, he'll drive a pile, but you'll watch it's all with his lower body, not proportional upper body strength. And he'll get beat by an edge rusher. And playing at a smaller school at Western Michigan, you'd expect the best offensive lineman to be a left tackle, but he played right tackle. I don't see him, although he played tackle in college and he's being scouted as a tackle, I don't see him as an NFL tackle. I think he's a guard or bust. I haven't seen his combine numbers, but if his combine shows a good shuttle time, he may go somewhere around the third or fourth round as a guard. But if his shuttle time isn't very good, I think he's going to wind up being a late round, 5th, 6th type guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism, it seems, from scouts and whatever, kind of the same reasons you're saying. How does he have even the strength to compete with guys in the NFL? And if he's having trouble in college, how's he going to do in the NFL? So there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, and the one thing is you'll see is big tackles get drafted. You can't teach size, so sometimes these guys will reach, and we'll discuss one of them a little bit. But the next guy is Antonio Garcia, 6'6", 290 pounds, out of Troy. He's got good size, very sound footwork, played well when he played against big competition. So, Troy didn't play a lot of big competition, but I was especially excited to watch a game that he played against Clemson, and he looked great against Clemson. He doesn't give up on his blocks. He very athletic, nice mirroring on pass blocking, and he's still got room to grow into that frame. Like he's big, but he still has room to grow into that frame. The cons on him are he's not very fast. He stands up a little too tall sometimes, and he's going to have to work on that leverage. And I was disappointed that he only did 24 reps on the bench. It's not awful, but I would have liked to have seen a few more on there, 27, 28, but not awful. But watching the film on him, I saw more pancake blocks, and pancake blocks are when you actually knock the guy you're blocking to the ground. So he had more pancake blocks than anybody else I watched. I think fundamentally he is sound enough to play left tackle in the NFL, but he's also, strong enough and big enough to play right tackle. He's going to have to get stronger than the next level, but he's my sleeper pick at tackle. I kind of like him, and if he's somebody that falls in the second round, I would love to see the Bears get him.
Yeah, if he's a good fit here and it's something to build on that core that we need to keep building on, I'd take a player like that.
And the next guy is, he's got a crazy name. It's Julian Davenport, but it's spelled like Julie, like a girl's name, apostrophe N. So it's Julian.
Oh yeah,
Davenport.
I see that. Yeah.
6'7", 315 out of Bucknell. He's got solid enough footwork. at least solid enough to stop edge rushers and speed rushers around the end. He uses hands well. Probably one of the better guys I watched using his hands. So you'll see him really just strike out and hammer the defensive lineman with his hands. He's got really good arm length, which is nice. But at Bucknell, he didn't play against big-time competition at all. He stands upright way too much, and 6'7", that's a problem. Too many chop blocks in the running game. I would have liked to have seen him, especially against the lower level of talent that you play against a Bucknell, for him just to dominate and drive block somebody rather than chop block them. You would really expect him to dominate at that level, and he just didn't like he should have. And he only did 18 reps on the bench, which is really bad. Sometimes his feet get inconsistent, and that's going to cause him to struggle at the next level because your footwork has to be constant all the time. I think he's an absolute huge project. He's a guy that you're going to have to put on your practice squad for a couple years and then give a shot to as a backup. He's too much of a risk for me. I'd probably pass on him.
Yeah, kind of like what you were saying about one of the other guys we were looking at recently. There's some skepticism of how he's able to compete in the NFL, and maybe there's some enough red flags where we could ask legitimately, is he able to play or not? And it's a legitimate concern, basically.
Yeah, and the last guy I looked at is David Sharp, 6'6", 343 from Florida. Pros, he's got really long arms, hard to bull rush because it's just his massive size, and he's big. It's about all the pros I found in him. Cons, he's an absolute waist bender. I never saw him go into a 3-point stance. It's always he comes out a 2-point stance, and that's not going to fly in the NFL. Way too heavy. Poor feet technique, poor hand technique, only 19 reps on the bench. He's an underclassman. He's coming out as a junior. He's a definition of a guy that would have been better served going back for a senior season. I don't know what circumstances he has in his life or with his family that he's coming out, but I think it's bad news. I think he should have gone in this offseason and worked really hard and come back that senior season in, SEC team. He's going to get the eyes on him and increase his draft status. There's some scouts that are really high on him, and I think those are scouts that are really big on big size guys because they don't get much bigger than him. I am not one of those people that's high on him, though.
A lot of people feel the same way. According to this report, there's questions of how he handles his play, basically. Like you were saying with the stances, they were kind of saying how can we rely when you can't do what's depended on in the NFL? Like how can we trust you to develop that quickly because you have to play a certain way in the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you in the NFL you have to have some level of athleticism as an offensive lineman. He's too big. And the guy that big in college when he's 21, 22 years old, 23 years old, it's not going to get any better as he gets 27, 28, 30. It's those weight problems are going to consistently be there. And we're starting to see more and more that the best offensive linemen are athletic guys that happen to be big rather than big guys that are just big.
Right, because you got to be able to hold your own. You got to be able to use your strength properly to block and to do all those kind of things. You don't want to just be some big unathletic guy just out there trying to block because you need to use a certain amount of force and a certain amount of exertion to perform that way.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to Jack Conklin, but he was a guy I really liked coming out of the draft and went to the Giants, and he's like very Kyle Longish in his build, maybe a little bit bigger, but his footwork was absolutely sound. Used his hands well. Everything about him was just consistent, and you were like, I like this guy because there's no flaws in his game. He may not be a superstar, but he's going to be solid, and he's turning out to be better than that. So when I look at offensive tackles, if I'm going to draft somebody very high, it's going to be because I see no flaws in their game. Because as an offensive lineman, I guess with any position in the NFL, if you have one flaw, that can really screw up your whole game. And offensive linemen, it seems that those can be exacerbated. If you don't have the upper body strength, they're just going to drive you backwards. If you have inconsistent footwork, they're going to use things like swim move and stunts where, you're going to get caught up in your own feet. If you're slow out of your block, they're going to use a speed move. There's too many good pass rushers for to have a big glaring weakness in a game as an offensive tackle. And I just don't see anybody in this draft that's maybe Antonio Garcia, but nobody else there's no red flags in my book that I would spend a super high draft pick on.
Yeah, because it seemed like everyone you were reading and some of the ones I've kind of looked at on this list, there's just a lot of red flags on a lot of them, whether it's the way they play, the way they physically hold up, and just kind of the way they hold themselves together, whether it's physically or, there's just overall a lot of red flags.
Yeah, and another situation is, I know it doesn't get highlighted enough just because you end up with enough offensive tackles that are good in football as compared to good quarterbacks, but college doesn't develop offensive tackles for the NFL like you would expect them to. Is technique-wise fine, but it's strength. It's like they don't have a good strength program at these big colleges. You would think that they would, especially if it's going to be somebody that's highly looked at. You would expect your head coaches and your coordinators and your strength coaches to pull you aside and be like, hey, listen, A, this is going to benefit us as a team, but B, this is going to benefit you in your future in the NFL by going on this weight program and getting stronger. And it's not happening. It's just not happening.
Yeah, that's pretty important. A lot of people talk about how important it is. So, it's unfortunate for teams that are really in need of that position because, you're hoping to get a new young stud, but it just doesn't look like those are really available.
Yeah, think about how bad of a position that, for the Bears when they drafted Chris Williams and they put a lot of eggs in that basket. And he just didn't have the strength to play the position, and he had an injury. It was a double whammy, and it never worked out for the Bears.
Yep, exactly.
But unless you have anything else to add, I think this is going to wrap up this episode.
No, I think we talked about a lot of great stuff and pretty much everything that was on my mind today.
Yeah, so if there's anything you guys want to add or anything you want us to cover, you can reach Alex at ShyFanPat1 or at Swerski Sports on Twitter, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com. And make sure that you are hitting subscribe on however you listen to podcasts, whether iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. And until next time, bear down.
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on the plains. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears. Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.